Okay, so before we start this video, Konami has gone back and forth on this in the last 12-ish hours. I recorded the video this morning about the new time rules that Konami announced, and well, they didn't announce it. They just like released a document that stated there was these new time rules, and then they walked it back. They changed the document back to say the original stuff, but then they made a tweet, and on this tweet they said, actually, so the rules are not changed yet, but we're going to change them in the future. So everything that I'm talking about in this video, I recorded before they walked it back and walked it back forward. However, everything that I say is still extremely topical because they are still planning on implementing these rules in the near future. So without further ado, let's talk about it. What's up, guys and gals? It's me, Mudahar. No, that's not right. That's not right. Welcome back to a series so epic, even Blue Eyes subscribed. What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Distant Coder, and Konami, bro, I have no words. They continue to just make more and more and more mistakes to piss off the player base of this game. No, I'm not talking about the new changes to Time Wizard, Edison format, or anything like that. I'm also not talking about product. I'm not talking about prices or anything. I'm talking about a change that just got implemented that is going to change the landscape of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh tournaments forever should this rule actually get implemented and not get changed back. So Konami have released an FAQ for regionals and higher level tournaments that effectively changes the way that the time rules work in Yu-Gi-Oh. Now, I know a lot of people are very upset about the time rules that we've had for the past, I don't know, feels like something like 7 years or something like that, where the people weren't very happy about the whole end of phase time rule, and people have been calling for a change to happen for, you know, since it's been implemented. And now Konami have somehow succeeded in implementing a new time rule that is genuinely a lot worse. So let's break it down. So the time rules that we're playing with currently prior to this brand new change is the time rules where when time gets called, you play until the end of the current phase, and then whichever player has the most life points is determined the winner of that game. So basically what that means for those of you that are not, you know, maybe are watching from like another card game, don't play Yu-Gi-Oh, or people that play Yu-Gi-Oh very casually, don't go to tournaments. What this means is that let's say you're in your main phase and time gets called, you do not get a battle phase. You don't get to leave the main, go to the battle and try to deal some damage by attacking. Instead, the only thing that you do have access to potentially win the game if both players are tied on life points is using effects that can make you gain life points or lose life points. This has caused a lot of players to essentially be playing what is known as time cards in their deck, cards that are played specifically with the intent to be used to gain life points or to inflict burn damage to the opponent and otherwise wouldn't see any play at all. Cards like Volcanic Scattershot and Red Resonator genuinely haven't seen as much play as they have recently in the last decade, specifically because those cards are able to win in time. Scattershot burn for 500, Red Resonator gain 1,000, something along those lines. They were just very prevalent effects and cards that people typically played in the side deck to take advantage of these time rules. Now, that wasn't as egregious as in recent years. What we have had is we've had archetypes that released where they just in-engine have burn cards or cards that gain life that in-engine allow you to win in time. I'm talking Munin, the Runic card, or in very recent memory, we see Fusion Lacrima from the Fiendsmith engine. You would see so many games go to time, and then whichever player burned with Lacrima for 1200 in time would just win that match without the match actually reaching a proper conclusion. Or even at the last EUWCQ that just happened this past weekend, we saw in top 8 a Vanquishable player that took the whole tournament to win that top 8 round by just resolving Borger to burn for 15 twice and burned the opponent for 3,000, and that just wasn't, it was enough for them to win the game. Their opponent couldn't come back from that, despite the fact that their opponent's hand was insane, and that the end board the Vanquishable player put up wasn't even that crazy. But because of the time rules that were implemented at that time, these cards were just significantly better once that timer hit 0 than they were during the rest of the match, causing people to either side these cards or, you know, play them for a primary reason, like Borger is primarily more of a draw card than anything else, and Lacrima was an engine piece, a combo piece. But now, all of a sudden, when the timer hits 0, these cards unlock a brand new effect and a brand new win condition, and players really weren't fond of it. So, assumedly, because people were calling for a change of these time rules, Konami did respond. They put out an FAQ earlier today outlining some new time rules, and I'm not gonna lie, I read over them, and I think that these are probably the worst possible time rule changes I've ever seen. So let's go over what the changes are to the time rules, what's new, why they're doing this, and also what new scenarios are being created by these time rules. So as part of the new time rules, the round timer is going to be going up from 45 minutes to 50-minute rounds, which means good, we have 5 more minutes to play out our round. But this is where things get a little bit weird. When time ends in the round, the match is over. Neither player may begin or continue any action that may take place in the game. So long gone are the days of play until the end of the phase. When time gets called, the round is over. It's just completely done. No more actions can take place. So you got to be very, very well aware of that timer, because the moment that thing hits 0, the game ends. If the time expires and the match has not finished, it will be a double game loss. A match is considered finished when one of the duelists has either won 2 duels or lost 2 duels. Effectively, what this means is that a match can effectively no longer end in a draw at all. Essentially, the only thing that can happen in terms of an outcome for a match is either one player has won 2 games, the other player has won 2 games, or if neither player has succeeded in winning 2 games over the course of the 50-minute timer, both players will be issued a match loss. Meaning that draws just aren't a thing anymore. If you're finishing a match at 1-1 a pop, if both players have 1 win apiece, it's not a draw anymore. It's a double loss. Both players will be issued a loss for that round, which is egregious. If the duelists have completed 3 duels without the match finishing and there is remaining time in the round, the duelist will go into a 4th duel. This is effectively outlining that you can no longer have a match result in a draw if, like, in game 3, a player resolves Crimson Nova, for example, burning both players' life points to 0 simultaneously, meaning that the duel can result in a draw, but the match itself cannot. If there's time to play a 4th duel, you keep going until specifically one of the 2 duelists has won 2 games. And last but not least, if a duelist has won 1 duel and the match has not concluded after 50 minutes, both duelists will receive a double loss. This is a really important one. The life points at the end of time being called no longer matter. The life points don't matter. All that matters is how many duels have reached a final result. What this means is that, let's say, for example, I won game 1 against my opponent. It's currently game 2, time gets called, and I'm up in life points. Per the prior rules of time before these changes, what would have happened is, because I'm winning game 2 in life points when time gets called, and I won game 1, the second game would also be deemed a win for me. I would win 2-0, and the match would be done there. However, with these time rules, even if I won the first game and I'm leading in the second game when time gets called, because we did not reach a situation, a point where one duelist won 2 games during regulation time, both players are being given a loss in the match. Basically, what this means is you must absolutely, without fail, reach a conclusion to the match in those 50 minutes, and if you do not, both players are given a loss. Hey guys, Coder from the future here. I just woke up and I saw all over Twitter that a bunch of people were arguing about these time rules potentially meaning double game loss for the players rather than double match loss. Essentially, what people think this means is that if one player is up 1-0 on the opponent, that if time gets called in game 2, then they would both get given a game loss, resulting in one player having 1 game lost and the other player having 2 games lost, resulting in the player that won game 1 ultimately winning the match. And I just wanted to clarify why I don't believe this to be true, and I brought receipts. The first reason why I believe that this means a match loss and not a game loss for both players, essentially meaning that double loss means a match loss for both players, is specifically because they make no mention of draws in any way in this document. And I think that if that was the case, they would have probably clarified that, let's say time gets called in game 3, so both players are 1-1 win apiece. Then at that point, if they both get given a double loss, they would both have the same score at the end of match procedures, which would essentially make sense to result in a draw if that's what they were doing, but they make 0 mention of draws. I really don't think that you can assume that it means that a draw would happen. It's also not unheard of in other card games to do this. There are a lot of other card games whose end of match procedures actually do result in a loss for both players should the match not have concluded in regulation time. But another big factor here is that if you look at the Konami tournament policy documents, they only make mention of the term double loss twice. The first time that they make the mention of it is under the number of duels section in the tournament policy, where it specifically says that a match is considered a double loss. That is the only time the words exactly double loss are mentioned in any of the policy documents, and the only time that the double loss is mentioned at any other point in the policy documents is in the penalty guidelines document, where it specifically says that an irreparable game state should never result in a, quote, double game loss. So here it specifically mentions a double game loss, whereas the only instance of saying double loss refers to the loss in a match. It's not up in the air. There is no up for debate about whether or not this is supposed to be a game loss for both players, and then if one of the two players has 2 losses and the other one doesn't, that player is determined the winner. I really don't think you can look at it that way. It's very, very clear from the way that this is written that they intend for it to be a match loss for both players should you not reach a conclusion in regulation time. Now, I know what you're thinking. In what world does anyone read this and think, oh, there are plus sides to this? There has to be a good reason for this. Well, I've outlined a couple of reasons for why I think Konami is implementing these rules and what they think is the upside to having these rules in the game. So let's go over those real quick. First of all, I think a big thing is that it disincentivizes players from playing time cards and winning with time cards by basically taking advantage of the time rules. I said it myself while watching the UWCQ this past weekend. Every single round that ended in time by a player just, you know, activating some effect to burn their opponent for 500 and winning the game is horrible for viewership. It's really, really bad to watch. It doesn't make the games exciting or interesting to watch, and it also allows a separate alternate win condition to be unlocked for certain players and certain decks in a situation where they otherwise wouldn't have a way to win in a, you know, a good way. So I think that these new time rules disincentivize the idea of I'm going to play a time card, and if I go to time, I have this new way to win. It's no longer a thing that players can do. Instead, players just have to play faster and finish in regulation time, because otherwise you're both getting punished for playing slowly. The second reason I think Konami is implementing this rule is specifically because time rules exist for one reason overall. It's so that tournaments don't run for an egregiously long amount of time. So the situation that's happening here is that even with the time rules that we had, where it was play until end of phase, sometimes people would play until the end of their phase for an additional 5, 8, 10 minutes even sometimes, because as we know, turns in Yu-Gi-Oh! Go for a long time. I think these new time rules do help concluding tournaments in a more reasonable time, but I do think that comes at the detriment of, you know, the player base and games actually finding a proper conclusion. Giving a double game loss to both players is not a good player experience, but I think Konami is valuing ending tournaments and being out of the venue at a reasonable time above offering a good player experience, which is one of the reasons I think they're implementing these new time rules. And last but not least, I think that one of the bigger reasons why they're implementing this is because this disincentivizes intentional draws. As we know, per the tournament policy for Konami, you are not allowed to create an intentional draw in Yu-Gi-Oh! As opposed to in other games that allow intentional draws. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, if you intentionally attempt to draw with your opponent, that is considered cheating and would result in a disqualification and more than likely a suspension from official tournaments. So it's really difficult to combat intentional draws, specifically because if two players just, you know, agree to draw and then kind of just play slow, with the time rules that we had at the time, it's very, very easy to cause intentional draws. But with these new time rules, draws are not a thing anymore. So basically, it removes one entire thing that judges need to look out for, which is collusion at tournaments. So while I understand that collusion at tournaments was genuinely a very big problem, and intentional draws happening on the regional level, on the YCS level, to guarantee a top cut or guarantee a nationals invite or something like that, it was a problem, but I really, really don't think that implementing these new time rules are the best solution to solve that problem. While it is a problem, and I understand the problem does need a solution, I don't know that this is the best possible solution. So those are the 3 big reasons that I think Konami is implementing these new time rules. However, these new time rules actually cause a lot of new scenarios, problematic scenarios, that I think maybe Konami haven't thought of. So let's go over some of the difficult situations and negative scenarios that are created by these new time rules, and ultimately what you're most likely going to have to face if these time rules come to pass and you play in a tournament that uses these new time rules. A lot of times in Yu-Gi-Oh! You find matches where the first game of the match actually takes a long time to come to an end. If you look at round 4 of the EUWCQ, you'll see the Sky Striker versus Memento match that went to time in game 1. Basically, their first game lasted the entire 45 minutes. With the old time rules that we had, this basically just resulted in the person that won in time the first game was the one that was deemed the winner of the match, which is, you know, ultimately completely fine. However, with these new time rules, if a situation like that occurred, here's what would happen. So let's say you get a game one that basically goes to time or very close to it. Let's say you get a 45-minute game one that, you know, doesn't take up the entire 50 minutes of the round, because they are upgrading the amount of time to 50 minutes. What is the situation that's presented here? So let's say player A has won the first game in 45 minutes and there's only 5 minutes left of the round. Player B is presented with two different scenarios. They can either A, concede to player A, recognizing that there's no chance that they win 2 games over the course of 5 minutes, and they would rather let their opponent have a win rather than both players walk away with a loss, because that doesn't benefit anybody. Or the second scenario that can come up is player B could potentially be really salty, be really upset that he lost that game one, and has this mentality of, if I'm going down, you're coming down with me. There's nothing against the rules saying that player B can't attempt to keep playing and play for those 5 minutes. But realistically, a game is likely not going to conclude in those 5 minutes. Heck, oftentimes in Yu-Gi-Oh! One turn doesn't conclude in those 5 minutes. So let's say you get a 45-minute game one where player A wins, and then player B goes first game two, and then time gets called while player B is still in their main phase comboing. Then at that point, player B effectively just took down player A with him, because player B had no reasonable chance to win that match per these new time rules. And because the match didn't reach a conclusion, player A also got punished for going into a grind game one and lost the match despite the fact that they were up a game. So basically, it creates a scenario where player B can either concede because they recognize that there's no chance that they can win the match, or they can just choose to play it out and effectively take their opponent down with them. Overall, it's just a lose-lose scenario for whichever player loses that game one in a grind game. It just presents a scenario where there's not even a point for player B to even attempt to be winning the match, because with the old time rules, at least a player could play to try to win game two and potentially have the match end in a draw, which at that point isn't even all that bad for both players. But instead here, player B doesn't even have a realistic scenario where they can attempt to win or even attempt to get a draw. They're playing for a loss, and they basically have a decision to make whether or not they want to take their opponent down with them. And I think overall, this just creates a very toxic dynamic, and it's going to cause a lot of frustration at tournaments. There are a lot of times where games will go 30, 40, 45 minutes in game one, and this is going to result in people just taking each other down with them. And it's really, really not fun. It's a very toxic environment. And when we talk about some of these matches that go to time, there's a lot of decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! That are incentivized to go for the grind. Decks like Sky Striker, decks like Runic, decks like Memento, heck, decks like Vanquish Soul, one of the best decks in the game right now. They're decks that have, as part of their engine, really, really good grind games. And these decks that have a really good grind game typically want to go to turn 5, turn 6, turn 7. They're not playing for that OTK. They're playing to outgrind their opponent, because that's what their engine was designed to do. And despite the fact that that's what their engines are designed to do, these new time rules punish these decks for playing the way that they were intended to be played. And this results in a situation where playing these decks ultimately comes at the detriment of the player, because the player is ultimately going to be putting themselves in the situation where they might have a win in game one or even a loss in game one after 20, 30, 35 minutes, and then realistically they don't have a real situation where they can come out as the winner of the match, just because the deck that they're playing takes longer to win the game and doesn't outright just OTK. This ultimately really just makes it feel like Konami wants people to play these glass cannon decks that basically win by turn 2, win by turn 3, and are basically saying old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Is dead. Despite the fact of the old Edison changes and all this stuff, we're not even talking about that. Old Yu-Gi-Oh! Is dead because Yu-Gi-Oh! Used to go to turn 10, turn 15, turn 20. But nowadays, if you get a match or even just a game that goes to turn 7 or turn 8, usually a turn 8 game will take something between 25 and 30 minutes. So now what Konami's ultimately saying is, we want your games to be done by turn 3. And if they're not done by turn 3, it's because you are not playing fast enough. You're going to be issued a double loss if you can't reach a conclusion to your game, or can't reach a conclusion to your match, rather. It's very clear that Konami really is implementing these new time rules to pave the way for this whole get the game over with mentality in Yu-Gi-Oh! They just want you to get the game over with as quickly as possible, OTK that opponent, win by turn 1, you know, create that unbreakable board that your opponent can't out. That's just what they want Yu-Gi-Oh! To be, and these time rules very much accentuate that point. But now this leads me to what is probably, in my opinion, the most egregious thing that is going to come out of these new time rules. I think that the most egregious situation that's going to come from these time rules is specifically a scenario like I outlined before, where a player wins game 1, let's say in 30, 35, 40 minutes, and then player B realizes that there's no chance that they would ultimately win the match. Let's say that they continue playing and time gets called. And you have a situation where one player is up a game and the other player has not won a game. If player B decided in that moment, after time gets called, to give their opponent the win, to be like, hey, there's no point for me to take both of us down, you know, you won game 1, just take the match. That will now result in a disqualification for that player for a UC cheating infraction, because as an example outlined in the tournament policy document states, it says UC cheating, tournament fraud, a duelist alters the result of the match after the match has officially concluded. They made it very clear when writing out these new time rules that once time is called, no further game actions can be taken, meaning that the moment time is called, if a match has not concluded, the match now results in a double loss, and that is a result that cannot be altered in any way by the players. So if there is a situation like that, where time gets called and both players would result in getting a double game loss, if one player would decide at that moment to fill out the matchup saying, oh yeah, the opponent won, like I'll give him the win or something like that, they would be basically breaking this tournament rule of altering the result of the game after the result of the match has been determined, and would result in not only that player getting disqualified, but there's a very high chance that that player will also get suspended for doing exactly that. So ultimately, not only do these new time rules offer a situation where a player with malicious intent or is salty or something like that can decide to take down their opponent with them should they have a long-winded game 1, but it also creates a situation where a player with good intentions that realizes there's no point for both players to be getting a double loss and that this rule is very silly, and just allowing their opponent to take the win after time gets called if their opponent is up a game, for example, that player then gets punished for doing so. So it just creates an overall very toxic situation where none of the players involved in the situation come out as a winner. No one really comes out on top. Everyone comes out upset in this scenario, and I really don't understand why this is something that Konami is deciding to implement, because all it does is create an environment that is toxic for all players involved. Now, I know that a lot of people were bitching and moaning about the time rules that we had prior to this change, and I'm not gonna lie, I was one of them. I really didn't like the time rules of end of phase. If you ask me, what I really think a perfect time rule would be for Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that when time gets called, play continues until the end of the next turn's battle phase. So let's say time gets called on my turn, you keep playing until the end of the battle phase of my opponent's turn. I think this gives both players a good amount of time and opportunity to come out on top in the game, lower their opponent's life points through combat and stuff like that, so that the game can actually reach a natural conclusion. However, with these time rules, not only do you not offer the players any opportunity to reach a natural conclusion with their game should time get called, you also punish both players for thinking, having to read. Like, imagine you're sitting across from an opponent who's playing some rogue deck you've never heard of before, and you have to read each and every one of their cards. You're like, oh fuck, I'm gonna go to time. I have to read every single one of these cards. It's ridiculous. Are we really punishing players for not knowing what every single card in the game does? That makes no sense. It's absolutely ridiculous. So anyways, now that you know how I feel about it, I want to know how you guys feel about these potential new time rules. Leave it in the comment section below what you guys think. Do you like these new changes? Do you think these changes are going to stick? Do you think Konami is going to turn them over? I think that we should really be talking about this, because this is genuinely something that alters the way tournaments and competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole play out. And I think that overall it is a net negative for the entirety of the player base that is attending competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments. And I would really like to hear and see people talk about this, because I don't think that we should just be letting this come to pass and being like, it's whatever, Konami will do whatever they want. I think it's really important that we talk about this and that we make it clear that we don't like these time rules. Unless you do, I would love to hear if you guys like these time rules. What is it exactly about these time rules that you guys like? Let me know in the comment section below, and thank you guys so much for watching. I hope I explained this in a way that you guys can all understand very well. And with that being said, I'll catch you all in the next video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Peace!